Hi everyone, we are here today with Ben Aris from Intellinews. Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for being here with us today. So, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, hi, my name's Ben Aris. I'm a long-serving journalist, mainly covering emerging Europe, but not only. I lived in Japan a few years, I lived in India for a year, Germany 7 years, but Moscow I spent nearly 15 years since 1993 and just fell into journalism. It wasn't a plan, but when you're living in all these rich countries, you need a job and writing articles is something you can do. And you don't actually, you work for someone who lives in or is based in the UK or the States. You can just choose to be wherever you are. And it's been fun, but hard work.
Okay, so you didn't choose to be a journalist. This wasn't the plan at the beginning. You're saying that. Okay,
I wanted to
but
be a scientist and it didn't work.
okay, so this is, like a start, right? For this interview, amazing. But tell us that you are now, liking what you do.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I've just had the most enormous adventure. I mean, by various chances, I ended up in Moscow in 1993, just after the whole Soviet Union collapsed. And
Right?
there were no freelancers there, and this mad story. I was there for a month when Yeltsin put the tanks on the streets, and I looked out the window, and this tank drove past on its way to bomb the White House. And then my father was a journalist, so I sort of had it hardwired in. And I rang one of the papers in London and said, "Look, I'm in Moscow. Our tanks just driven past my house. Would you like a story?" And they were like, "Yeah, yes, yes, we've got someone on
Yeah.
the ground." And it just took off. And Russia, although it looks terrible today, but actually it's a lot of fun. It's a crazy city. The Russians are crazy people. Putin is Putin, but the Russian people themselves are very nice. And then I was just on the front row seat of this massive story as it unfolded, and the journalism just took off. It became easy. Just every time you rang an editor to sell a story, they would jump on you because you were there and at the front line. And later,
Right.
I Russian, and it got easier, and I ended up being bureau chief at the Telegraph for many years. Then
There you go.
got married, had some kids. My wife is German diplomat, so we came to Berlin, and then I ran the Guardian desk doing Germany for a break. But after a year, I was so bored that I went back to Russia because Germany's boring. I mean, it's nice, but it's boring. Russia is just mad. Every day something.
Right. Right now, all that I can think is I need to go to Russia, right? So, and I can
I
skip Germany, basically. That's what
Yeah,
you're saying.
I would recommend put it on your bucket list. Every single
Definitely.
person who came to visit me in Moscow, you'd find them 3 o'clock in the morning in some club, dancing around, and they would say, like, Ben, I had no idea it was like this. I thought it was like, so old babushki sitting in the snow, like eating potatoes. And it's not. It's a huge,
And
vibrant,
drinking vodka. Mm.
well, that still happens.
Okay, perfect. Add it to the bucket list. So, well, you just answered what was going to be my first question. That was your first writing job, right? Right, yeah.
Oh, I actually got my start
Oh no.
I was in Japan again through various. There was a horrible recession in the UK after I finished university, and so I
Okay.
just moved to Tokyo. And it was in Tokyo that I started writing a little bit for the
Oh,
Japan Times. And I had another job, a day job, but I enjoyed it. I used to write commentary and opinion pieces about global politics just for fun. And they published it all. So that gave me the confidence to later, when I was in Moscow, when I was actually doing the real job,
right.
gave me the confidence like I can write, people do publish it. So, now I'm going to make a job out of it.
Well, it looks like everything just turned out right for you, man. I mean,
Right place, right time, and
perfect
crazy,
timing.
crazy enough to
Great.
stay.
Well, well, now you're here in Intellinews,
Yeah,
which is going to lead me to some other questions. We would like to know a little bit more about Intellinews, if you can just briefly
sure.
share about that.
So I was in Berlin working for The Guardian, getting bored, and I wanted to re-engage with Eastern Europe. And this was in the middle of the noughties, and Russia in particular, but the whole region was booming. And so we decided that, look, if you can float a magazine about fly fishing, then surely you can float a magazine that's about the business of all these new countries that are emerging, and there's a two
Definitely, right?
trillion dollar stock market, so there must be some business interest and and lots of trade. So we set it up. I set it up in 2006, and then initially I was thinking we should just do a Russian magazine because it's obviously the biggest, most important of the Eastern European countries. But within like a week, it became clear that we had to do the whole region because there's too much inter-investment between Russia and Ukraine and Prague and what have you.
Right.
And the investors who are our target audience, mainly based in London, because they're the guys with the money. They're going to buy subscriptions and stuff. People are going to want to
Exactly.
advertise. So, but the investors in London don't look at it as Russia, they look at it as a whole region, emerging Europe. So we took on, and also the beauty of having freelance for 10 years was I knew all the freelancers in the region because
Of
occasionally you went to
course.
Czech Republic and you just have everyone's number. So I rang everybody up and said, like, how would you like to work for me?
Mm-hmm.
Then I raised some money, not very much. The plan was to raise 1.5 million. We actually only raised 300,000. But then that's another advantage of being in Moscow is there's lots of millionaires. I mean, everybody made so much money, and you just went to your
Oh my
friends and
God.
said, give us 50 grand. They're like, all right, here you go.
Okay.
Um, but that that money was allowed us to get us off the ground. And actually, if people are interested in tips in publishing, everybody who's come into my space and tried to launch a magazine, they all have the same plan, which is come print a magazine, work for 6 months, try and sell some advertising, and the thing will break even after 6 months. And that doesn't work. I saw 4 or 5 people launch, and they all had the same model as I did. And the thing about
Definitely.
only having 300,000 was that we couldn't afford print, so we went online. But then after 6 months, we were starting to become well known because we were doing lots of great articles, and it was only then that we launched the print magazine when we already had a reputation and we had some clients who wanted to buy mags, and that actually worked very well. And so we managed to get it off the ground, and it grew relatively fast until 2008 crisis, which buggered everything up. Put us into,
Okay.
but we've been dealing with crises like ever since, and we work in an emerging markets world, which is very volatile, but it's grown, and now it's fairly large. We cover 100 different countries with at least 100 staff around the world, and because we've been doing it so long, and because it's so complicated, that we have a very loyal readership who keep us going.
Yeah, I mean, we can tell in all honesty, in Newstex, we love Intellinews and we love your content as well because it actually takes some time to build an audience inside of the platforms that we serve. It actually takes years, and you became in our channels like so popular so fast that we were like, who are these people? Like who are they?
Yeah,
So
we
I mean,
probably
congratulations, you've
thank you.
made an amazing job.
Thank you. I've got grey hair now as a result. But we do old school journalism. We do objective, unbiased reporting on lots of very difficult markets. And, obviously
Right.
the war in Russia is very emotional. And somebody has to look at it and say things like, the oil sanctions are not working and this is why. And the plan to, bring the Kremlin to its knees has not gone well. And the war in Ukraine has not gone well. And there's a narrative in the mainstream media about, stand with Ukraine and never report the negative stuff, only report the positive stuff. But again, people I deal with, professional investors in particular, they're interested in what's actually going on because they've got money in the game in the form of they bought
Exactly.
bonds. So you try and be objective. But unfortunately, it means I annoy everybody. I annoy the Ukrainian side. I annoy the Kremlin. I got banned from ever going to Putin's speeches because I wrote a very
What?
But it's like a sort of I should get a medal. Putin hates me. This is good.
Oh my God. Okay. Okay. So perfect. That is perfect. Why not? Hmm. Right. Well, so now that you've been, telling us a little bit about your history and how everything has come up, even in Intellinews, can you please recall what was the worst decision that you've made in your career, in the
Setting up
publishing career?
setting a publication up, I think is probably the worst idea I ever had. Just
Excuse me? Ah.
it's insanely difficult. The problem is like I'm a dyed-in-the-wool journalist, and I set BNE up, Telling News up because it's a publication I wanted to write for because I had lots of stories. But that comes with making it commercially viable. And I'm not a businessman per se. I mean, happily, it turns out I seem to have enough talent so that we're in profit and it's grown. Nevertheless, it's just a phenomenal amount of work and having
Hmm.
to learn business. But I mean, from the journalism side, I think not the worst, but the scariest thing I've ever done was that time with the tanks that evening. There was a
Hmm.
firefight between the Russian forces and the communists. And I went up there and stood outside the TV tower. And then the next thing I know, I was standing behind a bus and bullets were flying over my head.
Ooh,
And I was with my
scary.
friend, and we were like, "Do you think we ought to go home now? I think we ought to go home. Trying
I
to get
think
this."
so.
But I don't know. I love it. I think I enjoy every day. I go to bed on Sunday looking forward to waking up at 6 in the morning.
Ah, you're such a
Just
romantic.
it's
There you go.
got something to say, and it's important. That's
Okay, so that kind of actually leads to my next question that was going to be the opposite of the previous question, and is what has been the most rewarding moment of your career?
um I think it's when you get the story right. And
Okay.
the point of journalism is it's not just a business, particularly my kind of journalism, news journalism. It's to inform people and to hold government companies to account. And when you do a really good piece explaining something, like I said, I've been complaining about the narrative on the Russian reporting. I think a lot of it is very skewed and biased. But
Mhm.
the biggest success we had was, or the most significant story we wrote was in 2016, where we caught an oligarch who owns the biggest bank in Ukraine stealing
Mhm.
money from the bank, and not just a little. He stole $5 billion and
Wow.
emptied the depositors, which are normal old, pensioners in Ukraine, regular people, and he stole all their money. And we discovered this because we got to look
Wow.
at the loan book, and so we wrote a story, and we caused a massive scandal in Ukraine. We wrote that as a cover story in November, and the central bank of Ukraine closed the bank down a month later.
Wow. That
And
is impressive.
the biggest bank in Ukraine. And I was at a conference, and I went up to the Minister of Finance, the central bank governor, and said, "Look, I wanted to ask some question." Said, "Oh, by introduction, by the way, I'm the editor of BNE Intellinews. As you know, we're a niche publication. You probably haven't heard." And she looked at me and she said, "You, we've heard of. You caused this bank to collapse. So yeah, I know who you are."
Oh,
And you feel proud. You've done your job. Of course, this oligarch he's actually been arrested, but only recently. They're trying to
is
put
he still in jail,
in jail in Kiev, yeah. And part of what we wrote is part of the evidence against him, because
Of course,
we
I bet.
started to hold on. And again, that's
Impressive
very,
work.
it's satisfying. I mean, we don't do that very often, but occasionally you have a big home run like that. And as I say, I wrote this opinion piece about Putin's speech to the point where the Kremlin read it and then banned me going to his speeches. And that's kind of satisfying too, you know.
Exactly. Like, why not? I mean, are they scared of me?
Yeah, exactly. No, but it means you're making a difference, which at
You're
the end of the day.
definitely making a difference. I know. We are so proud to have you and to have you here again as well in this interview. And thank you, for letting us and all of our publishers to learn a little bit. from you and your story.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
So now I have to ask you about other publications. Do you follow other publications? Do you have other publications that are favorites of you rather
Yes,
than Intellinews? Could you
there's
share a few?
there's a variety. I worked for the Telegraph for many years, but it's a very conservative paper, and I was very pleased to get a job with Guardian, which is my favorite British newspaper. And
Okay.
it's just fun to write for too, because the Telegraph is very sort of serious, but the Guardian, they let you write. I went out one night and met this Ukrainian guy who runs this mad bar here in Berlin and plays really crappy Russian pop music. But it's one of those things where it's so uncool that it's actually incredibly cool because there's just there's no getting it wrong. I mean, you go there dressed in a tutu and you'll be welcome.
I
And
get it.
I pitched this to Guardian. I said, look, there's no story here. It's just, I had a funny night out in Berlin. And they were like, oh, that sounds fantastic. Go ahead and do it. And I wrote one of the things I'm most proud of and one of the pieces I most enjoyed. And I continue to read The Guardian because they do that kind of story. Just silly, colorful pieces about life and people.
I
So
love
no,
it.
and apart from that, I just consume lots of news. I used to read The Economist, but I found it once you actually get into the story, it's not as good. It's beautifully written, um, and
Okay.
so that's been a touchstone of mine. Um, and The New Yorker, that's another one I admire. And again, they do long form journalism about things that are not really news stories, but are sort of in the air, and they have
Yeah.
beautiful writers. And I just, because that's the thing, I studied physics. So what the hell am I doing writing?
Oh,
I was never taught to
did
write.
you?
And I didn't really write essays until I was like 21. And so what I do is George Orwell gave the best advice on writing. He said, when you say what you have to say as clearly and succinctly as you can, then that's your style. And that liberated me because I was always worried about, I'm not a writer, I haven't been trained. But once I read that, then it became easy because you just concentrate on what you have to say. You say it as clearly, using as few words as you can to get to the point, adding touches of color. And the New Yorker, they do that so well.
Okay.
The people that are real pleasures to read. And so I do it kind of like that's my studying, how to improve my writing style, is I just steal from them.
Okay.
Rolling
We'll
Stone,
take that
Rolling,
into account.
Rolling Stone is another one. And my friend at the Rolling Stone during the 2008 crisis came up with this line because Goldman Sachs, was taking loads of money and they paid themselves massive bonuses despite the fact everyone else lost their money. And my friend came up with this expression: Goldman Sachs is the vampire squid sucking on the face of humanity. And I was like,
Wow.
wow, that's a diss. I mean, that's really good. And
It
I've been
is.
told in the meantime, Goldman Sachs has spent millions of dollars trying to undo this, get away from this vampire squid thing, and have completely failed. So I was like, hat tip to my friend. But Rolling Stone, that's sort of another genre. Hunter S. Thompson getting. He went into the Republican conference, really boring presidential race conference, and so he went there dressed in a gorilla suit, but with all his press credit, but completely head to foot in a gorilla suit. And the security arrested him. They wouldn't let him into the conference, despite the fact that he
What?
registered, and
No.
they locked him in this storeroom. But then he found all the security guards had left their lunches in there, so he just ate their lunch literally. And then
Revenge.
indeed, and then wrote this really funny story about this political. They're supposed to be doing, sort of politics campaign trail style, and he just wrote this story about what it was like to go to one of these things dressed as a gorilla and eat security guards' lunches. It was a great piece of journalism.
I need to find that. I need to read that immediately. Yeah. Well, I know, Ben. I mean, I'm having like a blast. Thank you for sharing all of this. I'm gonna ask you a few more questions, to close. I know that you have like a really tight schedule here, but piece of advice for our, new publishers. We have, new publications that are just starting, so we can use a piece of advice from you. So my next question is, if you were opening a new publication with the knowledge that you have now, what would you do differently?
Um, I think what I've learned in all these years is the key is to control costs. You're going to have to raise a bit of money from family and friends. You don't actually need that much these days because you can launch online. And the other piece of key advice that my brother gave me, who's a distinguished webmaster, is that if you get the content right, the rest will follow. If you get your idea of what kind of stories or whatever it is you want to report or write about, if you get the content right, it's really good. You need to focus on the quality of the content. Then you'll get a following and you'll grow. And then as your following grows, then that starts to open up commercialization, monetization possibilities. And so us being forced to launch with too little money was actually very good for us, because from the day one, I was focused on controlling costs. And again, you look at it very pragmatically, is that everything you're going to do, where's the dollar revenue associated with that? Don't do anything unless you can monetize it. And it's
Definitely.
very tempting. It's very easy to spend money. And so we've just been super cautious about spending money. And if I hire a correspondent because it's in a market that people are reading about, and then I get clicks from that market, I get royalties. So like, I'm going to spend the money on that country. But this country, I'm going to ignore because everyone else is ignoring it and it doesn't generate any revenue. And there's some exceptions to that because journalistically we are obliged to do certain amount of coverage, but
Right.
it's focused on the cost and to think very carefully, like this cost has to be matched with revenue or at least possibility of revenue, and you go slowly, which is not the way most internet ventures work. Most internet ventures work by you go out and you raise $20 million. Then you've got loads of money. But then, I don't know, a friend of mine did that at QZ.com, which is the Atlantic magazine's online thing. And he has the same staff as me, at that time, 25 people. And he was spending $20 million a year. And I was like, how? On what? And he said, mainly marketing. But then they got their readership up to 30 million, which is 2 orders of magnitude larger than my readership. But then once they got to 30 million, then that's enough so that you start getting advertisers who pay serious money for advertising. So,
Right. Right.
but
Yeah.
we never had that money, and as I say, we've grown organically, and it's taken 16 years to get to this point, 10 of which we were completely in Portland, and it's only been in the last 3 or 4 years that with the growth of syndications, that's made a difference, that we've become more profitable.
Wow. Well, there you go. So syndication is always a good option.
Yes, yes, no. Go on, you're going to
Yeah.
ask me about syndication now, aren't you?
Yeah, I just wanted to know exactly that. Like, why did you decide to partner with us, and what are like the perceived benefits from
It's
this?
great. Oh, it's great. I'm a big fan of syndication, and the way we work, we have a part of our output we put into public,
Mm,
and then the larger part is behind the paywall. But again, we're dealing with professional investors, and so we put the really sort of hardcore, um, added value things you can make money out. We put that behind the paywall. But we write a lot more general stuff,
right.
and we put into public, and that we share particularly with our syndication partners. And the syndication's grown. I mean, that's the bit of the business now that's actually growing strongly, and there's lots of people aggregating. And again, readers are increasingly going to one service to get all their news. And
Exactly.
so those services are motivated to get lots of different sources, and they're looking for high quality. And as we've said, that we do something fairly unique, in so much as we do this high quality journalism mainly on emerging markets. So there's not that much news about it, not serious news. And when
Definitely.
we started, I think 50-60% of our income was from advertising, but
Okay.
advertising dead. It's now 3% of our income. Yeah,
Mm.
it's moved on. And then
Yeah.
subscribers was the next big thing. And so we did all right there. We built up significant subscription revenue. Again, easy to sell because we're dealing with investment banks mainly.
Yeah.
But subscription is now stagnating as well because the business has become winner takes all, and people are
Mm.
willing to pay for information, but now increasingly they're only willing to pay for one publication. And that means a niche player like us, we still have subscriptions, and we sell them, but it's slowing down to the point where it's starting to stagnate. But this winner takes all means that the big famous publications, like say the Financial Times,
Yeah.
they have their great content, fantastic journalists, but they only go down so deep into the story. And so what they've started to do is they've started to bring in other publications that go a bit deeper, specialist niche
Okay.
people like us, because their readers want to read the FT coverage of oil market. But then some of the readers want to go deeper, and so they bring in something like our Newspace, which is an oil publication, and we go into a lot more depth. And that means the syndications are driving that. So everybody's out there trying to get quality publications in order
Definitely.
to supplement their own reporting. Or in your case, it's just to provide a diverse service in one place. Because again, the mentality is, I can't be bothered to hunt around on the internet. I want to go to a nice friendly site that I know that covers everything that I'm interested in, and then I can read it there. And
Definitely.
that's worked very well. I mean, it's growing the syndications quite quickly, and you either get paid a flat fee, but normally you get royalties. And then it comes back to my original point about get the content right, because you're in a pool of publications with
Exactly.
syndication, and you get paid on the basis of the number of clicks. So you've got to get the headline right, you've got to get the story right, you've got to get it out quickly because you have to compete with the other people in that pool. But I don't know, I never had a problem with competing. It's
You do it so well. I mean,
I'm the big dog. No, I'm not,
yeah,
but you do it well enough. And the team are fantastic. That's another thing. Include your team in the whole company. I talk to them about strategy and how we're performing, and the stories that did in their weekly meetings. We talk about stories that did particularly well, and people get into
definitely.
it. They get invested into it, and they want to run.
Totally.
And we just had the bombing in Iran that kicked off at 11 o'clock at night here. And the whole Iranian team were at their desks, coming in from the pub parties, whatever. And everybody went to work. We were there till 4 a.m. I didn't have to ring anybody. They were all online already doing stuff. Yeah, big newsmaker like that. You just everyone gets to the oars and starts rowing. But again, that's actually part of the fun of the job. You're participating in these huge stories, and everybody's
Definitely.
looking at you and saying, like, what the hell is going on? What does this mean? Does this mean it's going to be a regional war? And we're like, we don't think so, but this is why. And that makes a difference.
I love everything that you've shared today. I mean, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for being like so open, so personal about telling all of these stories, amazing stories. I now have to go to Russia, yes or yes.
That's been my
Yeah,
transformation. I started off as a physicist, a scientist, and nowadays I've become a
exactly.
storyteller, and I actually enjoy telling stories.
Yeah, you're
Kids,
such a good storyteller. I can, just stay here for hours and hours, but
yeah,
fortunately, we can't. But
no,
I think I will
you're not.
enjoy more. Ben, thank you one more time. Thank you. I know that me and everyone that is going to be watching this interview will learn a lot from you. So, and
It was,
all of the biggest success for Intellinews, we hope that these relationships keeps growing and that you keep, going further and further in this
it was
journalism
a,
industry.
it was a very great pleasure. My pleasure to be here. Nice to talk to
Well, I'll leave you for now.
you. Okay, talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye bye.